Fall is in the air, and while you might be ready for football and pumpkin spice flavored everything, the pros at Legacy want to make sure your furnace is ready too. Annual tune-ups help keep your furnace running safely and efficiently when you need it most. Visit LegacyHeatingandAirInc.com for online scheduling and exclusive furnace tune-up specials. And while you're there, make caring for your HVAC a breeze with an annual maintenance plan starting at just $13 a month. Legacy Heating and Air, a Cook family business.
Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the aspiring to be viral Notre Dame football show that is the pumpkin spice of all football shows. And we are coming tonight on our weekly basis, Monday nights at 7 o'clock for the rest of the season. And we're here to talk about Notre Dame football, which plays Clemson this Saturday at noon Eastern Time in Clemson, South Carolina. I'm Eric Hansen. The guy in the square next to me is Tyler James. Below you see this wonderful offer of a 30-day trial. I'm going to let Tyler tell you about that. We're brought to you by Legacy Heating and Air. We love those guys. I have a Legacy Heating and Air furnace in my house that's going right now. And since I'm not as technically savvy as Tyler, and I'm sure that's to all your disbelief, I'm going to let him take it from here and tell you what you need to know before we get started.
Yeah, you're going to need that furnace here this week. It's getting cold here in South Bend, so the furnaces are getting kicked into high gear. As for the 30-day free trial that Eric mentioned, we hope you consider taking advantage of that. It's exclusive to our YouTube audience here. You can use promo code NDYT when you sign up to get free access to our premium analysis, the recruiting coverage we do, and special access to us on the Insider Lounge. There is a link to that offer in the video description on YouTube. And if you are a new YouTube noob and need some directions of how to use YouTube, you can send us questions during the show. The chat box, it should be to the right-hand side of our talking heads. If you are on a desktop version, if you're on a mobile version, you will see a chat box below us. And make sure that you've clicked through on YouTube if you're trying to comment or submit a question, because if you're watching us like live on InsideNDSports.com or on the message board or even on social media, you're going to need to click through to make sure that you can comment with us. So hopefully you guys can figure that out, and we'll get things rolling with Eric's quick takes from today's Marcus Freeman press conference.
Okay, so we start with taking stock on Notre Dame heading into the Clemson game. The Irish are 7-2. They're ranked 12th in all three of the major polls. The one that really counts is going to come tomorrow night. That's the college football playoff rankings. The first set will be revealed. Well, it says 7 o'clock. They're going to talk for a while, but sometime in the 7 o'clock hour, we'll finally get to the rankings. They visit Clemson, which is 4-4, and they managed to lose to NC State on Saturday 24-17. Despite holding the Wolfpack to 202 total yards and running 81 offensive plays to NC State's 46. Clemson's leading rusher, junior Will Shipley, left the game early and is in concussion protocol. His status for Saturday's game is unknown, and that will probably be a cat and mouse game the whole week. The Irish whooped up on Pittsburgh 58-7 Saturday at Notre Dame Stadium, but lost tight end number 1, Mitchell Evans, for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. He was Notre Dame's leading receiver from any position and one of the most dependable offensive players on the team. We'll have a bit more about that a little bit later. Tyler, why don't you update them on the starting cornerbacks, one of whom missed all of the game, one who missed a big chunk of it on Saturday.
Yeah, Benjamin Morrison was a late scratch for the game on Saturday. He went through warmups, and they decided not to push him through what was described as a quad strain. So he missed the game against Pittsburgh, but Marcus Freeman said he expects him back this week, and he also expects back Cam Hart, who started the game but then left the game at some point with what was unclear whether it was a shoulder or an arm injury, but an upper body injury of some sort. But Marcus Freeman seemed confident that those guys would be able to play this week, and we at least got to see some more of Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray in backup roles this past week, and they both certainly stepped up with their first career interceptions. So we know Notre Dame has depth there, but it was nice to see those guys get some action and prove that as well.
Right. So what didn't get asked about today, but we assumed wide receiver Deion Colsey is still out. That was kind of when it came up last week, the implication that he probably wouldn't be back until after the second bye week. And then I also should mention Clemson, and losing to NC State, they had lost to Miami in double overtime on the road the week before. It's hard to believe the stat. They have lost back-to-back games for the first time since 2011.
Yeah.
And they are 2-4 in the ACC. If they lose to the Irish, they will have to win 2 out of 3 against Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and South Carolina just to make a bowl game. Notre Dame remains in the running for a New Year's 6 berth, and the Peach Bowl is the most likely destination if the trajectory continues. I'm actually talking to the Peach Bowl executive director tomorrow, and we're going to tease that out a little bit. So, Tyler, before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this week's Clemson-Notre Dame matchup and a little bit more on where Notre Dame goes without Mitchell Evans, what's your anticipation about where Notre Dame might be in the college football playoff rankings? Do you think they will see Notre Dame similarly to what the polls do?
I'm not certain. Because you're grading Notre Dame on what it's done, and the wins that Notre Dame has on its resume I don't think are going to look that favorable to some of the other teams. Especially with, I think Duke's probably not a top 25 team anymore. We'll see. So I think Notre Dame's best.
USC's hanging on.
Right. Yeah. So you have USC in there, and then the best things on Notre Dame's resume at that point are its losses. Louisville, by beating up on Duke, makes that loss look better, and Ohio State continues to win, and that will be good for Notre Dame's resume as well. But I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if Notre Dame starts a little bit lower than we expect, and they sort of creep up as some other teams have some missteps. But I don't really have a great sense for what they're going to do because it's the first one, and usually it's pretty similar, I think. But sometimes they try to look at it a little differently and at least portray that they're not influenced by some of the preseason rankings, which obviously impact the ones that are being updated on a weekly basis. What do you think?
Yeah, and the thing about it is USC has a gauntlet remaining on their schedule, so they may not stay in the top 25. Either that or they're going to go leaping up the rankings because they have Washington, Oregon, and UCLA. Those are the remaining games. And for Notre Dame fans that were cheering for them to lose to Cal and they barely scraped by 50-49, you want USC to do well at this point. That's Notre Dame's best resume booster right now. And there's nothing in the remaining schedule that's going to give them much octane. So that's difficult. Duke could rebound if Riley Leonard gets healthy, and they may jump back into the top 25 at one point. But remember, they built their ranking around beating Clemson by 3 touchdowns. Now, that's Clemson's only lopsided loss. Every other one has been in overtime or, NC State by a touchdown of regulation. But, in terms of building a resume, USC is kind of Notre Dame's hope for pushing it up in the rankings. So we're going to have Jerry Palm, who is CBSSports.com's expert on rankings and bowls matchup. Right now, he has Notre Dame projected to play in the Pop-Tarts Bowl against Oklahoma State, which, other than breakfast being the most important meal of the day, I think that would be a grave disappointment if Notre Dame ended up in the Pop-Tarts Bowl this year.
Well, if there's an interesting opponent, I don't know that it would be terrible, but Oklahoma State, especially because they played them just a couple of years ago, that wouldn't be very interesting to anyone, I don't think.
Yeah, and it wouldn't really test you. I think you want to be tested or have a great storyline or both. and the one bowl between the New Year's Six and the Pop-Tarts Bowl is the ReliaQuest Bowl. And right now, Jerry has Miami playing LSU. I think Notre Dame needs to play LSU if they are not in the New Year's Six, and that would be really interesting, playing Brian Kelly and Logan Diggs and Mike Denbrock and Brian Kelly especially. I would crawl to go to that press conference.
I don't care what the bowl is called if Notre Dame is playing LSU. It could be the toilet bowl for all I care. Like, if we could see those two teams play against each other, I'd sign up for that in a heartbeat.
Okay, before we go to any questions, let's get into the Mitchell Evans situation, how Notre Dame moves forward. First of all, how much of a blow is this to Notre Dame's offense, Tyler? Do you see it as?
Yeah, a significant one. I mean, he's the Notre Dame's best pass catcher this season, most reliable pass catcher. He seems to be the only one that they can
best one-handed pass catcher.
One-handed pass and two-handed. If he had a third hand, he would probably be the best three-hand catcher too. He does everything for Notre Dame's offense in terms of being a key blocker in the running game, and then also being the go-to receiving threat. He seems to be a guy that Notre Dame looked to on third downs when they really needed a catch. In the last 4, 5, 6 games, Mitchell Evans has been the go-to guy for Sam Hartman, and so that's puts not only stress on the tight end position, but the rest of the receiver group that Notre Dame has, and we'll have to see what those guys can do to sort of help replace Mitchell Evans. It was interesting to say interesting today. Marcus Freeman said something to the effect like, you can't replace Mitchell Evans with just one guy. And that's what he was saying about Michael Mayer last year. And I don't think, and obviously he didn't necessarily think Mitchell Evans would be able to replace Michael Mayer. And he hasn't been playing to Michael Mayer's level, but he has been the focal point of Notre Dame's passing offense like Michael Mayer was last year. So it just pushes Notre Dame's passing offense into a worse situation. And I think it will hurt Notre Dame in the running game too. I think Mitchell Evans is far superior as a run blocker than Holden Stays, who I think steps up into the number one tight end role with Mitchell Evans out. So I think it's a pretty big loss. What about you?
Yeah, well, I've got a few thoughts about this. One is this could affect 2024 as well in terms of tight ends. Now, they'll have 8 zillion tight ends on the roster if nobody transfers next year, because they're adding at least 1 and maybe 2. And then Bauman can come back from his injury. But, I mean, you look at the 2 ACL guys from last year. One happened in September, which was Bauman with the first time. Eli Reardon was in October. And Bauman was just getting back in August before he re-injured himself. Eli didn't get on the field until October, and this is coming at the end of October. So you wonder if Mitchell Evans, and everybody has their own timetables and so forth, but you wonder if he's going to be ready to go at the start of next season. As far as this season,
just real quick, Eli was coming off 2 ACLs, so I think it's worth mentioning. It wasn't just one ACL. He had an ACL injury the year before, and so I think that probably slowed him down as well.
Correct. So it was the same knee for Eli.
Yep.
So a lot of ACLs with the tight end group, but so you'll have Bauman theoretically will be able to rejoin, and you have, is it Jack Larson that's coming in?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay. And then Notre Dame is still trying to get a second tight end in this class. I mean, I think in terms of numbers, they have enough to make their offense function when they want to go 3 tight ends, which they have that package in short yardage and near the goal line sometimes. And it seems like Eli Reardon has been getting better and better with his run blocking each week that he's been back. I think his grade has gone up significantly. The thing is, we really haven't seen him catch a pass yet. In fact, he hasn't had one since he's been at Notre Dame. But I still think he's a real high-end tight end. It's just going to be interesting. I think maybe after we get past this Clemson game, maybe we'll see a little bit more of that aspect to him. And then Flanagan, to me, has been a surprise. He wasn't, from the recruiting analysts that had seen him play, there wasn't kind of this wow factor with him. And he's, for a freshman, I think he's wowed me. And I think Marcus mentioned it today. His physicality, I think he showed up bigger than people thought he was going to. He's strong. He had a really nice reception from Steve Angeli toward the end of the Pittsburgh game. So I like Flanagan playing. He's played a decent amount of snaps, largely in those multiple tight end formations. And then obviously you have Davis Sherwood, who's a fourth tight end. But I think that what's the most important thing here is that the wide receiver kind of little surge that they had against Pittsburgh, that's not a mirage, that's actually a step toward them asserting themselves a little bit more, because they're going to need them to step up. Who's the security blanket on third down and in the red zone right now? It usually was Mitchell Evans. And he certainly commanded the opposing defensive coordinator to give him attention and maybe give up some other things to do that. So do we want to go to questions before we get a little bit deeper into our
but I wanted to touch more on tight ends. I have some thoughts. The good thing about Stays is he's Notre Dame's actually a leader in touching down receptions with 4. Now, is
three
that
of
because,
them I think came in one game?
Is that because he's the second tight end and the attention goes to Evans more, and so maybe that's different with Holden Stays as the number 1 tight end? I have some trivia for you. How many pass routes do you think Eli Raridan has run in games this season?
I'll say 4.
It's 2. He's played 32 offensive snaps, and he's been on the field for 2 pass plays. So I don't know.
That's going to have to change.
Yeah, I like Eli Raridan a lot. I just haven't seen anything yet to be like, okay, Eli Raridan is back. You were talking about Cooper Flanagan impressing. I have been impressed with him as well, and so I'm curious. Like I could make the argument that I'd rather see Cooper Flanagan as the number 2 tight end right now than Eli Raridan, just based on what they've done this season.
I haven't looked at our depth chart projection. You did it today. Did you put Flanagan ahead of Raridan, or are they or?
I left them as ors.
Okay. But I think right now, I mean, realistically, Flanagan is ahead of Eli. Not Eli's potential, but where Eli is in his comeback. I think they're just bringing him along very carefully to continue his confidence and to continue to get some production out of him, at least as a run blocker.
Yeah, and Davis Sherwood was a guy that earlier in the season was playing a lot. But I think Cooper Flanagan has sort of supplanted him and sort of replaced him. And so I think Davis Sherwood probably has another niche role now moving forward with Mitchell Evans out. So I think that's worth mentioning. But I do think in my opinion, I think it might be Stays, Flanagan, and Raridan. But I think Raridan and Flanagan could be flip-flop there. We just haven't been able to see a lot of Raridan, and if he's ready to sort of take on that increased role with the opportunity there. But that's – for as terrible of an injury as it is for Mitchell Evans, that's the position that Notre Dame has talent at. Like, Notre Dame is not talent deficient at tight end. It's honestly because of what Notre Dame's offense has been outside of that tight end position that makes it worse.
Okay, I'm going to go one follow-up to you.
Sure.
How real do you feel like the progress the wide receiver room made against Pittsburgh? How real do you think that is?
I think it's somewhat real. I think it was losing Evans makes it harder. I think Chris Tyree now is the number 1 wide receiver. I know it seems kind of crazy to say that, considering where we started the season at. But I think there's more progress there. Even if Jaden Thomas and Jaden Gray.
Interesting though. He is number 1 in receptions, but he's not anywhere close to number 1 in snaps. And even Saturday, the top 3 guys in snaps in the wide receivers were 3 freshmen. It was Greathouse, Flores, and Faison.
Yeah. I think it helps that all those guys are back now. So, like, Jaden Thomas and Jaden Greathouse aren't impacting the passing game as much as I thought they would get. Now, maybe that's injury-related. I'm also wondering if the Greathouse thing is just maybe he's not as good as an outside receiver as a freshman right now, and maybe that's become a little bit of a challenge for him. where he would seem like maybe a more natural slot receiver. But you can't take Chris Tyree off the field for Jaden Greathouse right now, I don't think, unless maybe you play Chris Tyree outside some more. So I think I like that there is a rotation there. I think when you lessen the workload for even Rico Flores, I think that helps him. I like Tobias Merriweather getting out there, getting some time, even though his biggest play came later in the game. But I just like that the numbers are there. And because of the way everything's worked out, all those guys have experience now. So you can't really just say, well, that guy's a freshman. You got enough guys out there that have seen enough reps. Even Jordan Faison, I don't know that you have a lot of like, well, he's inexperienced, even though he's only played in a couple of games. But it feels like more than that, and he feels like someone that you can at least rely on with maybe a smaller set of assignments than you would give a full-time receiver.
I'll tell you what. This kid better be good in lacrosse, because every time I see him, I'm a little bit more impressed. Didn't you think when he came in and relieved Tyree in the punt return, that was an impressive return? I mean, he didn't return it for a touchdown, but boy, he added a lot of yards.
Yeah, I don't know if Chris Tyree's punt return touchdown could be attributed to feeling the heat from Jordan Faison as a potential replacement for him, but I think there was some now that Faison is now a scholarship player and they're using him, it was like, well, there's a potential that they could put him back there. But Chris Tyree certainly stepped up and made the big play against Pitt. But yeah, Faison looked good back there as well. He's so shifty. And that's probably this definitely correlates to him as a lacrosse player. You sort of see some of the side-to-side movement that you'll see out on a lacrosse field that makes him such a good player in both sports. All right.
Okay. Do you want to go to questions?
Yes, let's do that. We got a bunch of them.
I want to thank Irish Fan for telling us that we've had good points.
Oh, yeah. Did I get one too? I saw you gave you one
did.
earlier. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Irish Fan. Good point by you as well. We got a number of questions here. Let's go first to James, since we were talking about receivers. Any explanation about time management before halftime? And did Jaden Thomas re-injure his hamstring?
Did you ask that question Saturday after the game?
I asked about the halftime. Yes, I did ask.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of like it felt like a canned answer that they wanted to not give Pitt the ball back, basically. Which, to me, I don't really buy. Like Pitt, what were you afraid of on Pitt's offense?
Yeah, it wasn't like wasn't like Caleb Williams was going to get the ball. Come on,
right. Yeah, and we're talking about like 30 seconds at most. Like it wasn't like you were going to give him the ball back with 2 minutes left. So yeah, I didn't. Marcus just said that they wanted to get to run that clock down, which is what they did. But by doing so, they limited their options on what they could do. And I think Pitt was like, hey, the worst thing that can happen here is we get called for interference. And there's a penalty. And then they're just going to have to kick the field goal unless they want to go for it on first down. So I think it allowed Pitt to be more aggressive on that third down play. I can see doing it if it was third down. Like if it's third down and you're wasting the time between third and fourth down, then go ahead and do that. But you had the plays there, and then you're probably not anticipating Pitt committing a penalty, but there's always the chance that if they do, then you could get back out there. If there's a pass interference like it was, you get first down, and then you could add 3 more plays and chances at the end zone. So I think I would be interested to see if like Marcus Freeman days later has different thoughts on that, or if he would take that back or figure out what he would want to do there. What do you think about Jaden Thomas? Do you
he played 11 snaps. Marcus Freeman brought up the fact that he blocked really well on one of Audrick's 3 touchdown runs. 11 snaps seems too light for a guy that's as good as Jaden Thomas. So Thursday, we have a Zoom with Marcus on Thursday where we can ask a couple of questions. And I plan to ask about Jaden Thomas among some other things just to clean that up a little bit, because I don't know that he re-injured it as much as maybe they're just, again, trying to be careful with him, until they get to the second bye week and then give him a little bit more rest and then, full go. But that's my read on it.
Yeah, and there was a deep pass that was incomplete to him that just felt like he wasn't able to kick it in gear like he would be if he was fully healthy. And I think it's just something they're going to have to continue to be careful with. Those hamstring issues don't usually go away fully during a season. They're usually sort of nagging with you. And so it's something that we will continue to monitor moving forward.
Are we going to leave That's a Good Point Tyler up, or are we going to take more questions?
Oh, no. Sorry. I didn't know I clicked that. That's my fault. That'd be funny if I just left it up the whole show. Oh, sorry, guys. There was James' questions. I thought I clicked on James's question. So behind the scenes, I keep the dashboard that our live stream goes through very small so I can see my notes. And so I can't even see what that says on the screen other than there is something there that if I click on it, it's blue to indicate that that's the question up there. So that's my fault. If you want me to put up That's a Good Point, Eric, for a little bit as retribution, I'll do that as well.
That's okay. We'll go to the next question.
All right. Mike DeVoy asked, Tyler, when you posted the number 2s who were in the game by position, you listed Andrew Kristofic at center and Ashton Craig at left guard. Typo, or have they switched positions? That is correct, I believe. Now, I was doing it live, and I guess I wasn't double checking. I haven't gone back and double checked that, but it made sense to me because Andrew Kristofic was playing center in the Louisville game, and they have been giving him some opportunities there. So I didn't second guess that, but I didn't double check it either. So is that what you saw as well, Eric?
I believe so. And I think it also makes sense. I mean, there may be a thought again about trying to build options for next season. Now, Zeke Correll could technically come back. I don't think he will. He's got a 6th year. I wrote in my analysis today, there's only a handful of guys that actually have expiring eligibility, only 2 on offense, and it's Salerno, an injured receiver, and Sam Hartman, and everybody else could technically come back. But when you're planning and counting on Zeke Correll and Joe Alt probably leaving, then you think, okay, who's going to be the center next year? And Kristofic could be one of them. It could be Pat Coogan could move back to center. He was a center earlier in his career as a backup. You could try something really different and put somebody like Rocco or Billy Schrouth there, but there's going to be a lot of competition for those interior positions. So this makes some sense.
Yeah, and I did double check the PFF snap counts to see that, make sure I wasn't crazy, and that is what they had. They had Ashton Craig at left guard and Kristofic at center. I think we'll skip Ron Roberts' question because I think we covered all the tight end stuff. So Ron, if you have more you want to add to that, feel free to submit more questions. I think it's going to remain the Mike DeVoy show for a little bit. He's got a number of questions, so thank you, Mike, for filling the queue. If Joe Alt goes pro and Blake Fisher stays and moves to left tackle, who do you see winning the right tackle job? Baker or Emil Wagner? Tosh Baker, sorry. I don't know why I blanked on Tosh's first name there.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's another entry in there. I think Charles Jagaza is a guy that could compete, and there's people talk about maybe Garby Lambert getting in the 2 deeps, but I do think it would be a Baker Wagner battle. And my sense is with Wagner continuing to increase his size, I think he's one of the best. He'll be one of the best 5 linemen. I don't know if that's where he ends up at right tackle, but that would be my bet.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, I think for my preference, I'd like to see. I think Emil Wagner is a better suited for play left tackle than Blake Fisher is. I think Blake Fisher needs to grow tremendously in his game to be a left tackle for Notre Dame next season. I don't think that he has played to the level where he's like a lock to be Notre Dame's starting left tackle next season, even though he has experience playing right tackle. I do like Tosh Baker as a right tackle.
Me too.
So I think if you're asking me who would I prefer at right tackle between Tosh Baker and Emil Wagner, I would probably take Tosh Baker. And I think if Emil Wagner continues to grow, we saw Notre Dame try him at guard during the preseason. I don't love him as a guard given his size, but I think he's also just a more flexible player than Tosh Baker is. So I think Tosh Baker would be hard to play at guard. But you'd like to think that Notre Dame has its guards for next season with Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, though Pat Coogan is someone that I've mentioned before that Notre Dame had at center in the past, and I think could be an intriguing option at center if Zeke Correll moves on. So yeah, there's going to be a lot to sort of sort out at those tackle positions next season on the offensive line, and then potentially at center too if Zeke Correll is no longer here.
I wouldn't rule out Schrouth being better eventually than both of the guys that are starting now. I'm not saying that for sure, but
yeah,
a lot of potential there. I think if Harry Heaston were here, that might have already happened. I mean, he thinks Billy Schrouth is going to be a first-round draft choice someday. And then going back to Fisher, it's interesting when we had Mike Renner on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. He's a draft analyst, used to work for Pro Football Focus, and now he's got his own thing going. He was more bullish on Blake Fisher at a left tackle, I think, than either of us. I was surprised at how much he thought that was a great idea for Fisher to move to left tackle. But Emil Wagner is freaky, man. I mean, this is a guy that came in so light, but I mean, he won the state shot put championship. He could also sprint. I mean, an amazing athlete. And now he's in a big body and still has all those attributes. So it's nice that Notre Dame kind of has these first world problems as we look at, losing Joe Alt to the NFL.
All right. Jeffrey Stevens is here to break up the Mike DeVoy questions. Jeffrey asked us, for the bye week after Clemson, who are the first 3 recruits visited by the staff?
I'm going to let you talk about that. Usually isn't the priority hitting guys that are committed rather than uncommitted guys?
Yeah, that has been the priority. It's this time on the recruiting calendar doesn't really allow for like actual conversations when they're making these visits. So they're not that impactful to like go see, unless you just want to make sure a target knows like, hey, we're very interested in you. Which Notre Dame does that as well, but it's usually in travels in like combined with, okay, we're going to go to the Chicago area. So we're going to see Cam Williams, but we'll also see some of the other guys that we're recruiting in the area. So to know exactly who they are, I don't know that currently. It's not something I've looked into. I would probably, if you made me guess, I would need to like look up who they saw during the first bye week, and I don't remember all those. I don't think anyone went to see Deuce Knight during the first bye week, so I would imagine he'd be pretty high on the priority list, the 2025 quarterback. And then I would need to double check, and you can't see guys twice. I think that is also part of the rules for this segment of the recruiting calendar. So I don't want to say
I'm
guys.
glad this is your question. I'm already confused.
Well, that's recruiting for you. It's meant to confuse you. And so Deuce Knight, I would probably say. So yeah, they've already seen Carter Nelson, so they're not going to go see him again. There might be a guy that Notre Dame's trying to flip that they'll go out and see and maybe try to keep that hush hush until that kid wants to try to make a visit.
Did they go see Ogboko? I don't know how to say his first name. Is it Namdi?
Namdi. They saw him before he visited. Yes. Notre Dame has already been out to his school. I'm not coming up with good answers, Jeffrey, because I don't know that I don't want to say something and know that would actually be wrong.
Well, I'm glad you did it really quickly.
But I was just buying time for people to submit more questions. No, I'm kidding. Mike DeVoy says, am I reading the depth chart correctly that we're looking at probably 10 of the 11 starters on defense being gone next year?
I don't think that's going to happen. So the guys that are definitely gone that can't come back, doing this off at the top of my head, there's 3 of them. There's Javonte Jean-Baptiste. There is Thomas Harper. And there's one more 6th-year guy that doesn't have eligibility on defense, and it'll come to me in a second. But a lot of these guys have a COVID year, or a redshirt year, or both. So Botello can come back. Mills can come back, although Mike Renner didn't think he should, thinks that he will probably go into the draft. Howard Cross, he thought, was the player that had helped himself the most this season for Notre Dame and probably will strike when the iron's hot. So that's a starter that probably won't come back. I mentioned JJB. Then the linebackers, they're all fifth-year guys. Jack Kaiser was dead set on leaving after this year and moving on with his football career, but he has not played a lot of snaps, and yet he's played well. There's a thought that Marist Liufau would come back for a sixth year, probably not J.D. Bertrand, and then we get into the secondary. D.J. Brown is the other guy that can't come back. So Watts will have it.
Did you see that from Irish fans? Should we give him the respect he deserves for that one?
I didn't say that, but I'll give him credit. I was just thinking sometimes it takes the cobwebs a while to move around.
No, you're good.
But Irish fan, I'll give you credit. Yeah, DJ Brown is the other one. Watts will have a decision to make. He actually has 2 years left if he wants them, a redshirt year and COVID year. Ben Morrison's obviously back. Kim Hart says he's going. So, I mean, if you do the math, I'd say it's fair to say about half of those guys will be gone. But you think about how much rotation they've had.
Right.
And you had Jalen Sneed playing a lot of snaps this year at linebacker. You have, the young Vipers, Traore, Burnham, and Tui Halamaka. Gabe Rubio's played a lot of important snaps in the interior. You still have Jason Anye coming back. In the secondary, Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray did such a good job at cornerback. They're going to be loaded at cornerback for a while. Safety is going to be interesting. Is Antonio Carter going to step up? Is he even going to stay another year? Or might he look for a different place to go? He's got another year at safety. Some of the young guys like Adon Schuler and Ben Minnick, you wonder how they're going to progress and so forth. And, there's always somebody that's a freshman that surprises you on defense. I think Kingston Viliamu Asa is going to be able to kind of work his way into the linebacker rotation next year, even though, you got Nolan Ziegler, you got Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury. There's a lot of good talent there. So, again, even if they lose half of those guys, they've got some pretty good talent coming.
Yeah, you'll lose some definite difference makers that Notre Dame will need to replace. But like you said, the talent is there. Notre Dame
and the portal is there too.
And the portal is there too. Yeah, that's important to remember because I think Javonte Jean-Baptiste has been one of Notre Dame's most impactful defensive players, and that I don't know that that position would be as strong as it has been without him coming in this past offseason. All right, a couple more questions. Ed Coquillard says, Coach Freeman mentioned Coach Mickens is capable of being a D coordinator. Was he planting a seed if Coach Golden leaves?
I was planting a seed. That was my question. And I wanted to get ahead of that story because I get asked about it a lot. And I think they would do a national search, and I thought Mike Mickens would get an interview. But I really wanted to – I do think it's probably more likely than not that Al Golden has a lot of offers either as a head coach or as an NFL position, and he'll have some decisions to make. But I was curious where he thought Mike Mickens was on that spectrum. And boy, he went all in with Mike Mickens today. And it was good to hear. It was good to hear what his contributions were and why he was so high on Mike Mickens. So I would think that Mike would be in the running for that position. Absolutely. So he was not planting a seed. I was the one planting the seed, and he threw a lot of good fertilizer and dirt and water on my seed.
He also made it a lot harder to keep Mike Mickens if Al Golden stays.
Correct.
Like
and you know, that's a big possibility. If Al Golden stays, Mike Mickens will probably get defensive coordinator offers. He's a really good recruiter. He's so good. I mean, he was so good at developing 2 and 3 star guys at Cincinnati, and he's doing it with all kind of star levels at Notre Dame.
Ron Robert asked, been quiet about Justin Scott. Do you think they are still trying to turn him?
I think they're still trying to turn him, but like with a 1,000-pound spatula, I don't think it's going to happen. It doesn't feel like there's any momentum for that to happen right now. I would say out of the 4 guys, they're kind of looking to flip. That would be the least likely, and I think that's why Nnamdi Egboko is kind of moving into focus for them, because I think that's the alternative to Justin Scott.
Yeah, I agree. There's not a lot of optimism there. I don't think you sort of shut that door just in case there's some sort of change of heart in some way. But there has not been any sign of wiggle room or decision reversal there from Justin Scott. I know we want to talk a lot about Clemson, so let's get one more question in here from Bob Bolt. Do you think we get a receiver in the portal?
I think they'll look at that. When you look at who's leaving eligibility wise, I mean, Matt Salerno is the only one that's really close to being out of eligibility. And then they could maybe go with a couple of guys from the portal if they think they're going to lose kids to the portal. But when you look at who's coming back, I think having an experienced elite receiver to go along with the rest of these guys would help bring them all along. I think you could justify that. And I think some of it too hinges on what's going on with Chris Tyree. I think that's a linchpin here too, because Marcus Freeman mentioned in his press conference today he'd love to see Chris Tyree come back, and feels like there's a lot more for him to accomplish in college. And so I think that will be a determining factor as well.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame has to, as long as they can find a match. Like, I think Notre Dame's dealt with too many wide receiver depth issues in the past couple of seasons to sort of ignore that possibility. And so I think that's something that Notre Dame will need to entertain. And I think you can do that while still keeping all your guys involved. I think Notre Dame has done a good job of keeping its wide receivers as part of the offense and in rotation. And Chancey Stuckey has talked about wanting to have like at least 10, and that's what Notre Dame entered the season with, but hasn't been operating with necessarily because of injuries throughout the season. So I think that's something that Notre Dame needs to and will consider going into the offseason. And Bob throws in, by the way, guys, come out to California next year for an Inside Indy Sports event at USC. You just tell us where to be, and I'll be there. I usually make our road trip, so as long as you're not offended by my presence over Eric's, I'd be happy to be there.
I'll throw in a partial score here. I just peeked at the women's basketball exhibition game. They are playing Purdue Northwest, and with 1 minute left in the second quarter, they are up 58-10.
And that is why we are not staffing that game. Yeah. Purdue Northwest is the school that I had friends go to when they felt like they needed to go to college, but didn't want to leave the home area. So I can't believe that Notre Dame is playing a Purdue Northwest team in athletics.
And the one thing I'll mention for those who follow women's basketball, Olivia Miles hasn't played a second in that game. We kind of anticipated, but we don't expect to see her maybe even in the month of November at all, and we'll see where that goes. She's coming back from a serious knee injury. I think she'll eventually play this year. I just don't think we're going to see her early.
All right, Eric, let's talk some Clemson.
Okay. So, let's look at the thumbnail of Clemson. Clemson is 4-4, and I mentioned earlier they've had a lot of close losses. They took Florida State to overtime. They took Miami to double overtime, lost by 3 touchdowns to Duke, and they lost to NC State by a touchdown. And you look at the games, and if you looked at the box score, you would say Clemson won either most or all of those games.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tyler, I'm going to ask you, why the offensive struggles and why the special team struggles, do you think, for this team with Garrett Riley as a first-year offensive coordinator, Lincoln Riley's younger brother?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, when you say you look at those box scores, I think if you look at the turnover margin, then it clues you into why they're losing those games. That has been a big reason why Clemson.
They're 95th in the country in turnover margin. Notre Dame is 8th.
And that is why that is such an important stat. It is hard to overcome when you're committing turnovers and not forcing as many to match that. As for the offensive struggles beyond committing turnovers, I think it's a little bit similar to what we've seen when Notre Dame's offense has struggled, that Clemson doesn't have a lot of playmakers at the wide receiver positions. I was looking at the Pro Football Focus grades. Clemson only has 2 wide receivers this season with receiving grades over 67, and that's Antonio Williams, 75.5, and Tyler Brown at 74.3. And Williams has only played in 4 games, and he missed last weekend's game again. He's been injured throughout the year. Notre Dame similarly only has 2 wide receivers above a 67. That's Chris Tyree and Jaden Thomas. They're not pushing the ball downfield very well. They're 121st in the FBS with 10.36 yards per completion. And that makes it harder to run the football, which Clemson wants to do, but they're not necessarily doing it at the mark that they would want to.
Not in the last 2 games.
They're the numbers.
I wrote about that in my notebook today. Miami started this. Teams are now starting to do what Louisville and Duke did to Notre Dame, and they're like, okay,
right,
go ahead, try to beat us with the pass. We're not afraid of your 5-star quarterback.
Yeah,
Cade Klubnik. We're going to lean into the run. Miami held them to 31 rushing yards, which is insane. And even NC State held them to 101. So I am expecting Notre Dame to say, aha, and do the same thing.
Yeah, and Clemson maybe without Will Shipley, who left the NC State game after a pretty ugly-looking hit. I believe he's in concussion protocol.
Correct.
And
we don't know his status. And
yeah, usually if you get a concussion in a game, it's hard for you to get back the following week for a game unless you're your symptoms have really gone away pretty quickly. I think the
thing is, Phil Maffa, who's their number 2 back, who's a big guy.
Yep.
Beyond him, they really haven't given carries to other running backs.
It's Klubnik. Klubnik's their other ball carrier, basically. I think.
And if you saw the Miami second overtime, you don't want him carrying the ball wide, at least.
I think he has 9 fumbles this season or something very high. So that goes to the turnover issue that I mentioned. The red zone offense is poor, and that's usually correlated to turnovers, and they've had a lot of red zone turnovers. I think they're 121st in the red zone scoring at a 70.7 percent rate. So that's why their offense isn't good. I don't know that I could tell you much about why their special teams aren't good, other than the guy that was hitting 70 yards in practice can't hit 70 yards in games, apparently.
Well, they switch kickers. They're 7 of 14, but they've only made 1 of 5 between those 2 kickers from 40 yards or more. And then they've been bad inside the 30. They've almost missed half of those. But yeah, I was looking forward to a battle of 2 kickers who allegedly kicked 70-yard practice field goals going against each other in this game. I don't know that we're going to see it. It's my biggest disappointment since I found out that the Smokin' Pig does not indeed serve breakfast. I included that in my notebook.
Oh, well, maybe I'll have to get some the night before and have it ready for breakfast.
There you go. So, and then on defense, what's your assessment of Clemson's defense?
They're good. I think they're in that Ohio State category for me in terms of like defenses Notre Dame has played. I don't know that there's like a real weakness in the defense. So yeah, I think Clemson's defense is going to challenge Notre Dame. That's why it's important for Notre Dame to be as balanced as possible. I don't think, like, if Notre Dame is as one-dimensional as it was against Duke and Louisville, like it's not going to work. Like, I don't think Clemson's defense is going to be able to be exposed by that. I think the one statistical oddity of them is sacks. They're not really high in sacks. I think they're 52nd in the FBS in sacks with 2.22 per game. Normally they're a little bit higher than that. So I don't think their D-line is getting after the quarterback as much as it has in the past, but otherwise they're pretty sound everywhere across the board and have done a pretty good job. And you're talking about a team that's been put in some bad spots by its own offense.
Right.
And the defense has handled that for the most part pretty well.
They're number 6 in total defense. There's a big gap to where they're scoring defenses, and because the offense has actually given up some touchdowns. Like Peyton Wilson from NC State had a pick 6. I mean, the defense can't help you there.
Right.
They can't run off the sideline and stop him. The thing I found really interesting, and I led my notebook with it, is how much the run game has played into every game in this modern part of the series that started in 2015. Sure. It's never been close in the running game. Whoever wins that, and they win it by a mile, wins the game, whether it's a close game, whether it's a blowout. Notre Dame last year absolutely obliterated Clemson in the running game. Let me get that up here. It was 263-90, and that was against a Clemson run defense that was even better than this year's. They were 12th nationally in run defense last year. They're 15th right now. And in the 47-40 victory in the double overtime in 2020, it was 219-44. And yet when the two teams played later, in the ACC championship game, I'm sorry, it was 208-34 at Notre Dame. They played 6 weeks later. Clemson won it 219-44. They smashed Notre Dame in the rushing game in both the 2018 playoff game and the 2-point victory down in Clemson, South Carolina in the monsoon in 2015. So, I mean, really, how that running game's going is going to be a really good indicator early on how this game goes. And if, again, Clemson doesn't have Will Shipley. Another little thing I thought was kind of interesting, I don't know if you will, but remember Notre Dame put all their eggs in one basket in the 2021 for Will Shipley. Well, he's got about 515 yards and 3 touchdowns this season. When they didn't get him, the 2 guys they scrambled for was Audric Estime, who has 911 yards and 12 touchdowns, and Logan Diggs, who's since transferred to LSU. He's Tigers' leading rusher with over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. And I'm not saying Will Shipley's a bust. He's been really good for them. But given their quarterback and turnover problems, I don't think he's been able to shine quite the way that his potential would allow him to. But I think they've all 3 done pretty well for themselves.
Yeah, and losing Will Shipley hurts. I think Phil Maffa is a good running back for Clemson, but I think he's becomes less valuable as the number 1 back. I think he's more of a physical back. He is averaging more yards per carry than Will Shipley, but he doesn't get used as a receiver as much. He's just not as versatile as Will Shipley is. And I think probably less likely to break long runs as Will Shipley is. But Phil Maffa is certainly a very good back, and I think would even being Clemson's number 2 back would be probably towards the top half of running backs that Notre Dame will have faced this year. So there's still talent there, but I think it does just take one more weapon from an offense that doesn't necessarily have a ton of them. And I think maybe even puts more pressure on Cade Klubnik, and he hasn't been handling that very well so far this season.
I'm wondering, Tyler, do you think that what we're seeing this year is a long-term dip for Clemson, or do you think this is just an outlier and they're going to get back to being the real Clemson, because we always talked about closing the gap between Notre Dame and Alabama, Clemson and Ohio State. And I'm not sure that Clemson, in most people's mind, in any program closing the gap, is in that sentence anymore.
Yeah, and back then, I always thought like Clemson was sort of like the model that Notre Dame needed to replicate. I thought you can go out and get like Clemson. So when Clemson was recruiting well, they weren't always getting like 25 player classes. They were getting smaller classes, but they were hitting at a high rate in terms of getting some of those 5-star guys. And that worked for them. And obviously quarterback is the key among that. Certainly their defensive lines had a lot to do with their success as well, and receivers for a while there. And we've seen certainly how that's impacted Clemson since it hasn't been able to get those receivers as of late. So like, I think this is troubling for Clemson moving forward. Like if Clemson keeps ignoring the portal, like how do you overcome that? You're going to have to be way better at recruiting then, to sort of make sure that you don't have holes in your classes and in your roster. So I think this is a sign of like everything can be overcome with a star quarterback. I think not everything, but a lot can be overcome with a star quarterback. And you would think that Cade Klubnik is that kind of guy, and DJ Uiagalelei before him. Those are two like 5-star guys that anyone would have taken as recruits out of high school, but they haven't. Clemson's offenses have not been 5-star offenses with those guys leading the group. So I think Clemson needs some serious reevaluation, and maybe like it's hit a point this season where it's like, okay, like Dabo's going to have to look in the mirror. Like, what are we doing here? Where have things gone wrong? Have the losses of the coordinators really impacted his program that much? Why is it turned into the way it is? From an outside perspective, I would be concerned if I were Clemson of what's going on now. I don't know the ins and outs as those that are covering the program regularly, but it does seem like it's hard to see how Clemson gets this back on track without sort of reimagining what it's been doing.
I think the one thing that's helpful to them is they're in a league that would allow upward mobility. I mean, if you look at the Big Ten, let's say Michigan State, it's going to be hard for them to move up now with Washington and Oregon and USC and UCLA joining the party. That's going to be hard. And then you still have Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan for them to get back up in the upper echelon of that. But yeah, Clemson needs to make some changes, in my opinion. Okay, Tyler, do we want to finish up with a lightning round of questions here?
Yeah, we just have a couple here. Ed Coquillard asked, or it's less of a question, but we can answer it. Look through Vanderbilt's season stats while listening. I see no game stats this season for Prince Collie. Surprises me. Can't find any info on him being hurt.
I actually think he did suffer an injury. I think I remembered reading that.
Yeah, I think in the preseason I had seen information about him dealing with some sort of injury. And I don't know if they just shut him down at that point. I haven't followed up since then, but I think you're right as well, Eric.
Yeah, I've been wanting to write this transfer story and tracking all of them. There's so many of them.
It used to be way more manageable.
It gets voluminous. I think it's going to wait until December when I'm previewing where they're going to be playing in their bowl games. I think because there's some great stories out there too. I did in my analysis. I did a catch up on the 2018 class, which is just one small sliver of the transfers. But Jacob Lacey's, I'm really interested to talk to his father and get caught up on his story. And there's a lot of other great stories out there.
Joshua Williams says, I can't see Dabo not having his team ready for this game and losing 3 games in a row. I'm pretty nervous for this game. Glad it's a noon kickoff. You think Notre Dame should be nervous?
Again, I think anytime you have a defense as good as Clemson's, they're going to keep you in the game. And it's up to, I mean, Notre Dame's offense has got to perform, but Notre Dame's defense can really maybe dictate where this game is going with its pressures. The mojo that they've had going on defense could really be a problem for Clemson's offense. This is not a defense I'd want to see if I were Clemson right now. So, I mean, this could be a game similar to the Ohio State game where it's played in the teens and it comes down to a play at the end of the game. I don't think that Clemson has gotten into the 30s this year, at least not in regulation.
Yeah, I in addition to the wide receiver and the offense, the wide receivers being injured and they're not being the passing game threats in those Duke and Louisville games where the offense struggled, I think another correlation is those were road games that night that I don't know that Notre Dame's offensive line has handled very well. So I think the fact that Clemson isn't at night is at least a better thing for Notre Dame. I still think Clemson will be a pretty good environment, but maybe not. Maybe their fans are bummed out being 4-4. So it's not as hostile as it could be. But Duke was an intimidating environment for Notre Dame the way its offense played. So I would imagine Clemson during the day is still something worthy of making sure you're prepared for. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Notre Dame's offensive line has looked better at home in the last couple of games, even against better defenses than it did against. Although I guess Duke is a good defense, but I don't think Louisville's defense is that good. But maybe they're better and are coming on here lately as well.
I'll mention one little tidbit too. Sam Hartman does have a positive recent history with Clemson. Last year in a 51-45 double overtime loss when he was at Wake Forest, he threw for 6 touchdowns against that defense.
Yeah, a little bit different than what he did last year at Louisville, and then it continued at Louisville. All right, one question for the way out. Jeffrey Stevens asked, what is the Halloween costume of choice among the grandkid demographic, Eric?
I don't know the last time one of them hasn't been Batman. I think it's Blair's turn. Blair is 5 in the birth order. Gemma is 6th in the birth order. She has not been Batman either, but she is definitely going to have something that's going to make her look beautiful. She thinks of herself as a princess. I have not taken inventory yet of it. I hope that my 2 oldest grandkids not only masquerade as really good students, they continue that into reality because they have needed to be a little bit more diligent in turning things in.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it, Eric. What do you want to say on our way out today?
I want to say thank you for Legacy Heating and Air for sponsoring the show. I want to say don't forget the free trial down below. I can't control my hand where it's going, but it's down below us. And thanks everybody for all the great questions and for tuning in and for making us not quite viral, but growing. And we're pretty happy about that. And I thank everybody for not commenting on Tyler's haircut because I did. I think he gave it to him himself, didn't you?
I did. Yes. I always cut my own hair. I am a cheapskate and I go with buzz cut. So I don't pay for anyone to cut my hair. And I got a compliment when I walked into the press conference today. So I didn't say, well, tip the barber and to say it was me, but I appreciate it. Yeah, no jokes at my expense yet.
Well, I will give you one haircut, and this isn't a joke. This actually happened. My last haircut, the lady that was cutting my hair, she goes, "Have you been meditating?" And I said, "You to me, like right before I walked in?" I go, "No." I go, "Why would you ask me that? Not that I'm against it." And she goes, "Well, you smell so good." And I thought, okay, I don't know the
correlation between
those two, but she did a good job. I thought I could not cut my own hair. I almost did during the pandemic when the barbershops were closed here. I was this close. I bought the equipment and then I started messing with the sideburns and I go, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. I'll just put extra gel in.
Yeah, my dad used to cut our hair as kids, and he used to cut his own hair. So I was like, well, I'll give that a try. I even made a few bucks back in college cutting some roommates' hair because they're like, well, if you can do your own, you can do mine. I was like, well, I don't do much more than buzz cuts, but I'll give it a try. And if worse comes to worse, we'll just buzz it, right? So that's
okay. Well, if we go any further on the haircuts, we're going to have Julio on. So
yeah, that's right.
Tyler, take us out of here.
Julio does much better than us. All right. Yeah. As Eric mentioned, we hope you consider taking advantage of our 30-day free trial of InsideNDSports.com. You can use the promo code NDYT, which is exclusive to our YouTube audience here. And when you sign up to get free access to our premium analysis and recruiting coverage and special access to us on the Inside Lounge. You can use that NDYT code. And there's also a link in the video description below. And we will have an Inside ND Sports podcast on Tuesday on our podcast feeds. And we will be back on YouTube on Friday for Place Your Bets. Have a good week.